Ever wondered the age of the oldest Grand Prix winner? What about the longest race in F1 history? Or the biggest penalty ever given to a driver? Well, these are just 3 unbreakable Formula 1 records that I want to share with you. Because I'll also talk about the biggest comeback in a single race, the closest tie in F1 history, and so much more. But first, there's one driver that holds the unfortunate record of the longest did not finish streak of all time. See, Andrea De Cesaris was a Formula 1 driver who got his start with Alfa Romeo in 1980, and he was known as a particularly fast driver, but he had one issue: he was not the safest. His first full season in Formula 1 came in 1981 with the McLaren team, and he only finished 6 of the 14 races that season, while crashing a total of 19 times between the practices and the races.
That's De Cesaris, Andrea De Cesaris, who does this so often.
But then, after a couple more seasons, he went into a record-breaking slump. After placing 10th in the 1985 Detroit Grand Prix, De Cesaris went on to fail to finish in 18 straight races between the 1985 and 1986 Formula 1 seasons. He seemed to make sure to find a way not to make it, whether it meant crashing the car or not, and he made some notorious moments out of it, like this one at the 1985 Austrian Grand Prix.
Oh, De Cesaris sideways, De Cesaris on the grass, he's going over! Oh, De Cesaris, a major accident!
But even with this insane record that will probably never be broken again, De Cesaris went on to have a long and lengthy career, lasting all the way through 1994. After it was all said and done, he had picked up 59 points, 5 podiums, and even a pole position across his career. But it's safe to say that a retirement streak like the one he put on will not be tolerated or broken in today's sport. Now, let's go all the way back to 1951 when Luigi Fagioli, along with Ascari and Farina, were racing the F1 circuit. See, Luigi Fagioli was an Alfa Romeo driver, but there was one unique thing about him: his age. In the 1951 season, he was 52 years old, which is much older than any driver nowadays, even with Fernando Alonso still on the current grid.
You know, I'm 56 years old.
Damn! I'm sorry.
And for this record, we have to go to the French Grand Prix of that season. See, back then the rules were different, and in this race all of the Alfa Romeo cars were having trouble, except for Fagioli's. And so, when he went in for a pit stop, he was ordered to step out of the car for Juan Manuel Fangio, who ended up winning the race, which gave both himself and Fagioli credit for the win. And Fagioli at the time of his win was 53 years and 22 days old, making him the oldest driver to ever win an F1 Grand Prix. Now, the next one makes almost no sense. See, the 1977 German Grand Prix included 30 drivers, but only 24 could qualify. A young Hans Heyer was ready to qualify for the ATS racing team, but he couldn't make the cut, and it looked like his race weekend was over. And he was the 3rd reserve driver for the race, and it looked like there was no chance he would race. But that all changed. See, Heyer had to start in the pits, and with a delayed start due to some technical issues, he was able to slip out unnoticed and start racing. But at around lap 9, his gearbox failed, giving him a DNF, and when the FIA found out he had been racing and started early, they also disqualified. And because of this race, he would be banned for the next 5 races, which ultimately led to a lifetime ban. With all of this happening, Heyer became the first and only F1 driver to receive a DNF, a DNQ, and a DSQ in a single race. Now, let us pivot towards another driver of older times. John Watson was a British F1 driver who competed over the course of 12 years, but one race sticks out. See, at the 1983 US Grand Prix West, John Watson had a poor qualifying time with the McLaren Ford Cosworth team and ended up getting 22nd place, behind even Andrea De Cesaris, who we just talked about. However, when it came to race time, many drivers who were able to fight for and gain the lead fell off due to spins and such, and doors were opening left and right for drivers further down the grid, including when Keke Rosberg and Patrick Tambay collided with one another and knocked each other out of the race.
Off, he always makes it back again, and here's another overtaking maneuver. He's up on the inside, and they collide!
And eventually, when it was all said and done, to many fans' surprise, John Watson came from 22nd place to finish first, with his teammate and F1 legend Niki Lauda finishing right behind him. See, this record cannot even be broken now or in the near future because there are only 20 cars on the grid, and even then, it's near impossible to come back to win a race from the very back. And while his win was not as dominant as this next one, it was still very impressive. See, back at the very beginnings of Formula 1, there were not as many teams and not as many drivers will drive in a race in comparison to how many would now. And in the 1958 season, when the Constructors' Championship was given out for the first time, there was a dominant winner, Van Wall. But during that season came a moment and a race that produced one of the most impressive, one of the most unbeatable, and one of the most dominant records of all time when the sport travelled to Portugal. The race was dominated by the Van Wall drivers, who were Tony Brooks, Stuart Lewis Evans and Stirling Moss. But when Stirling Moss crossed the finish line in first place, there was nobody to be seen for 5 minutes and 12 seconds, when Mike Hawthorn in his Ferrari was able to take second place in the Grand Prix. And this record does not like it will be broken ever. The regulations and the rules that they have put on the sport have pretty much made it impossible to create a car that is much better than the rest, and teams have to settle for the car that will be just good enough to be barely better than the cars around them. Now, moving forward to the 21st century, we have another record that has to do with a lot of time. See, in the Canadian Grand Prix, there was a huge rainstorm, and it caused the FIA to decide to stop the race for a total of 2 hours and 5 minutes. But even after the race had to be stopped for a little while, the drivers still caused some incidents and they were struggling to drive. And due to the amount of carnage and the lack of drivable weather, the safety car was out for what seemed like forever. But it was really just 32 laps or 45% of the race. Even the end of the race had some chaos as a defensive Sebastian Vettel spun off the track, giving the win to Jenson Button as the Red Bull had to settle for a 2-3 finish rather than a 1-3 finish. Now, in a way to keep something like this from ever happening again, the F1 changed their rules on how long a race should and could be a couple of years ago. But in a normal race, without any deviations such as a weather delay or a red flag, a race is given 2 hours to finish. However, in the event of a red flag or a weather delay, the race must be concluded by 3 hours after the start time, no matter the circumstances. But this number was just recently reduced in 2021, as the amount of time to finish a race under any circumstances was originally brought to 2011 immediately after the Canadian Grand Prix. So, because of rules and regulations once again, this record has been added to the list of records that will never be broken. Now, even more recently, we can focus on one of the biggest stars in recent F1 history. See, Max Verstappen is a very unique case because he's been dominant in the sport for quite some time, but he's only 26 years old and still considered to be in his prime. But the reason why it feels that way is because he was given his seat in F1 at such a young age. In 2014, he was able to get a job as a test driver for Toro Rosso at the Japanese Grand Prix. But then he was given a full-time F1 seat the year after, at the ripe young age of 17 years and 166 days, when he entered into the 2015 Australian Grand Prix. But even though he ended up retiring in his first Grand Prix, he was able to impress in his second at Malaysia. And he was able to pull off some very impressive moves, such as this one against Daniel Ricciardo, who was in his current seat at the time.
Max Verstappen tries to dance around the outside, now can skip lightly through the inside, and Ricciardo had to concede that because Verstappen was in absolutely no mood whatsoever.
And he was able to get some points off this race, getting 7th place. His young age shocked the racing world and caused F1 to implement a minimum age rule, where a driver must be 18 years old to hold an FIA super license. But even that's been recently changed with the emergence of future F1 driver Kimi Antonelli. But even then, it will take a lot for a driver at such a young age to enter into this sport, growing as we speak and dominate from the get-go.
Born in 97? Yeah. Jeez.
Now, moving back a little to 1997, the time of the reigns of Schumacher, Hakkinen and other legends. But we're going to be looking at one race in particular that happened in this season, and that is the 1997 European Grand Prix, where we're going to be looking at the qualifying session. See, the 1997 Drivers' Championship race was tight between Michael Schumacher and the up-and-comer Jacques Villeneuve. And when it came down to the last race of the season, the two definitely put everything all out on the table. First, Jacques Villeneuve passed the checkered flag in qualifying and was given a time of 1 minute 21.072 seconds. Then Michael Schumacher with blistering pace crossed the line, and as the announcers read out his qualifying time, they realised what it said. and that was 1 minute 21.072 seconds. And finally, there was Heinz Harald Frentzen, who was also coming round each corner with insane speed. And when he crossed the line, the announcers were clearly shocked at what they'd just seen, because he was given a time of 1 minute 21.072 seconds as well. But the rule states that whenever multiple drivers both record the same time, then the driver who recorded the time first got the higher position. So Villeneuve started the crucial Grand Prix in first place, with Schumacher in second, and Villeneuve's Williams teammate Frentzen sitting in third. And in the race, the two were still able to battle, and they did just that. Villeneuve was able to secure the championship win after Schumacher was forced to retire when he pushed into one of the gravel traps whenever he was fighting with Villeneuve. And the young F1 star had taken down one of the most dominant and prominent in motor racing history. Now, back to the qualifying times. While it could certainly happen again, the chances of 3 drivers tied with the same exact qualifying time down to the thousandths of a second for pole nonetheless are almost zero. And it was a feat that we will probably never see again in the sport. And lastly, we must talk about a time when Jenson Button racked up the highest grid drop in F1 history, and by a very wide margin at that. See, in F1, you're given a certain amount of components, and if you change out or substitute some of the components when you're not allowed to, you're given a grid penalty. And in the 2015 Mexican Grand Prix, Button and his Honda team did the extreme and changed out what felt like a whole car. First, Button was given a 25-place grid penalty for changing the engine and its various components, and then he was given 25 more grid penalties for having the same parts being changed again for a different practice session. These were the main 2 grid penalties that Button was given, but at the end he had accrued a total of 70 grid place penalties. But because there were only 20 drivers on the grid, he started in 20th, and the rest of the places that are added on seem to be just for show. See, Button ended up finishing this race in 14th. But he'll still be remembered for what he did in the 2015 Mexican Grand Prix. 70 grid penalties is a lot, and it certainly makes it a record that will stand forever. So, these were some of the F1 records that will never be broken. Now be sure to like, comment and subscribe for some of the best F1 content out there.